Welcome into another episode of Always Talking Ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton. It is finally time to preview the team that you either love or hate. One of the most polarizing brands in all of sports, the proudly independent Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And to help us do that is the owner of Irish Breakdown, Bryan Driskell. Bryan, thanks so much for hopping on with us to talk some Irish football today.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I always love talking college football, especially Notre Dame football. So I'm ready to rock and roll, man.
Yeah. Let's get to the 2025 team here. Let's start with the offense side of the ball. I've always said that I think this offense, obviously with Riley Leonard being quarterback last year and then transitioning to most likely CJ Carr this year, it's going to look completely different. Like it's just going to be a completely different type of offense with the downfield threat. Obviously, Carr not resorting straight to his legs after the first read's not there. But what's not going to change much is Joe Rudolph's offensive line. I mean, obviously, due to injuries, they started 2024 with a combined 6 starts, and they're entering this year with, I think, 55, around that
53
number.
53 without Jagasol.
53.
Yeah.
So, obviously, tackles, Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, like they showed out last year. They started a combined 31 games. Billy Strouth, Ashton Craig is back. So, obviously, from the time we're recording this to the time it releases, I'm hoping nobody else gets injured because obviously the news broke a couple weeks ago with Charles Jagusaw. And it looks like you can give us an update there. It looks like he should be back at some point during the season.
Yeah.
It looks like maybe Sullivan Absher is going to get the nod at right guard right now. So last year, I mean, with the running backs they have, they were solid in the run blocking schemes all year last year. And obviously Riley using his legs. The question is can they improve enough in the pass protection area for that passing attack to make the leap to where, this offense can actually thrive in that passing attack?
I do think run game wise, there still is an element to you've got to do better in the big games. And they didn't run block great against Louisville. They didn't run block great against Georgia. They didn't run block great against Penn State and Ohio State. They did run block very well against Texas A&M. I think part of that is because there was no film on the particular players that were in there, and Ohio and Texas A&M was also breaking in some newer guys, Nick Scorton, and first year in the system and things like that. So, I don't know that they necessarily knew what to expect from that Notre Dame offensive line, and so I do think there's that. But that's the big thing is Riley Leonard bailed out that offensive line in a big way a lot of times last year. And you're not going to have that, and you're going to have to improve. That's no question, especially in the bigger moments. And even some of the big plays Riley Leonard made last year. If you go back and watch that 3rd and 9 back shoulder he threw to Jaden Greathouse against Penn State, he got drilled. He didn't even finish his follow through. You look at the big post route he hit to Jordan Faison against Indiana that helped them put that game away and go up 27-3. Again, he got drilled. And so pass pro is going to have to get better. Hopefully continuity will help with that. It's not just that they had 6 new starters, but those 6 starters or those 5 starters with the 6 career starts never got to play much together. By the halftime of the 3rd game of the year, Strouth is out. Ashton Craig's out for the year. Strouth eventually comes back. He moves to left guard. They leave Rocco in at right guard. Coogan stays at center. Then they get to the playoff game. Knapp gets hurt right before halftime against Penn State. So you go into the title game with a brand new starting offensive line. That worked out because Jagasol's really good. But, you've got to try to find a way to get continuity. And when you're constantly moving guys around and Billy Strouth starts the season at right guard, moves back to left guard when he gets back from injury, it was just clear that there were communication problems because it wasn't just that like guys were getting beat. I mean, there was some of that at times. Guys are just getting beat, but there are times they're just letting guys run through. I mean, they're running slide protection and allowing 2 run throughs. Like that didn't even happen when I coached at like D3 football. Like we didn't even have that happen with our starters. We'd have that happen with our backups or maybe the first couple weeks of camp, but you don't have that in game 5.
So do you agree with everyone's like kind of opinion? And it's widely held opinion that they're the top offensive line heading into the 2025 season.
I'm not ready to go there, to be honest with you. I think there's a couple. Right now I have Penn State's ahead of Notre Dame. So like we actually did a top 10 O-line breakdown, and then I had Notre Dame number 2, but it was close between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. If you were going to tell me, like, let's say Lance is like, hold on a second, Bryan, I want to argue for Texas A&M. I say, okay, I'm 3. It's not. It's close. Yeah. It's a projection. My thing with Notre Dame is we know what A&M is going to be. Notre Dame, it's more about projecting what I think they're going to be. And the reason I went with Penn State is because they both return a bunch. They were both really good running the football. Penn State went for slightly more yards. Notre Dame went for slightly more yards per carry, aided by the fact you had a quarterback that averaged 5.7 yards per carry. But even the two running backs had, I think, about 0.7 more yards per carry. The starters did. Now, Penn State's guys had both over 1,000 yards, but Jeremiah Love was like 0.5 better than Nick Singleton in per carry, 6'9" to 6'4". And then Jadarian Price was almost a full yard ahead of Katron Allen, 6'2" to, I think, 5'2". But Penn State was way better in pass pro last year. Not just sacks allowed, because sacks can be misleading, but also just the number of pressures allowed, the number of hits on the quarterback, and then just consistency. Like, look, guys, as a quarterback, I just need to know that when I drop back, I know what to expect. I know my left tackle's not good, so I can just handle it. Or I know my center struggles with this, so I can just be prepared for it. There just is no consistency last year. And when you look at Penn State compared to Notre Dame, that's where they get the edge for me. Now, having said that, would it shock me if Notre Dame ends up number one? No, it wouldn't. Would it shock me if A&M ends up at number one? No, not really. There's about 4 or 5 offensive lines this year that I really like, but Notre Dame's in there. That's the whole point. I mean, we could spend the next half an hour debating who's 1, 2, 3, or 4, but the point is they should be in the conversation for one of the best. And this is a big year for Joe Rudolph. This year 3 for him. And your 2023 O-line was disappointing despite having a top 5 pick and another second-round pick at right tackle, and a kid at center who transferred to NC State and was an all-conference player. Your 24 offensive line was up and down. You can kind of explain that away with the injuries and things like that, but you're in year 3 now. And it's kind of say, okay, let's put it all together and be number one, first and foremost, a consistent offensive line. And then number 2, if you can then be dominant, that's great. Because you guys saw last year, A&M game, for example, how big was that hole that Jeremiah Love needed to get through for that game-winning touchdown? It was like about that big. Yeah. That's all these two backs need, is about a hole that big. And if you give them a hole about that big, it's going to be a problem for the other team. So my whole thing is just number 1, just do your job. Like, you don't have to be Notre Dame 2017. You don't have to be Notre Dame 2020 for this offense to be elite. You just have to do your job. Just get a body on a body, let the talent take over, and this team is going to be good. So if they do that minimum, this is going to be a really good year. It's kind of like the Clemson O-line from 2018. It wasn't elite. Like, their left tackle was an undrafted free agent. I think their highest drafted offensive lineman was, I think, their left guard, who was like 4th round. They had another guy in the 4th round. But they just did their job week after week, snap after snap. And that's all Notre Dame needs. Anything beyond that, and then you start saying, like, okay, this team could be a problem.
Bryan, let's talk about these trigger men that these big uglies are going to be protecting this year. You got C.J. Carr and Kenny Minchey. I know that it's, I guess still a QB competition. They haven't
it is
truly named a starter. But it seems like that to me that Carr gives them the ability just to open things up a lot more and be more explosive in the downfield vertical passing game. He can stretch the field more in the passing game, and I think he gives Mike Denbrock that extra just layer of things that he probably wants to do more with this offense and stretch the field with this receiver unit that he's got coming back this year. Carr can run. Obviously, he's not the type of runner that Leonard was. We know that. Minchey, very talented dual threat guy, can run more. So you obviously do think this is still a competition. Like, what do you think we're going to see from the quarterback starting out this year for the Irish?
Well, one thing is, and it's funny you bring that up, because I was working on I'm going through the season and breaking down all the games again, and I'm going to have a bunch of breakdown videos on my premium website where I'm going to go look at different things. And I loved Riley Leonard. I love what he brought to the table. Well, one of the videos is going to be like how many missed opportunities there were last year. Like, I'm going to show a clip where he went through his reads too quickly and threw a check down that was incomplete, where Jaden Greathouse is like, there's not anyone within 15 yards of him. And not like I start to throw, like, I love this. So fans will do this. You'll see a guy wide open, like, oh, why didn't he throw it there? And you're like, well, go look at the play. When he goes here, that safety stops and drives on the ball. That's why the guy comes open. If he'd have just thrown that route, that safety's right there. I'm talking like just wide open. And there were so many times like that where it just was like, this was there. There was a play against A&M where Bo Collins runs a post corner route, and a burst corner route, and the corner just falls down. And if Riley was reading the play properly, he's stolen that thing over top, and it's a walk-in touchdown. I mean, there's so many plays like that last year. And so those plays are expected to be made more consistently with both CJ and Kenny. Because one of the things about Kenny Minchey, which is ironic, is you're describing him as a dual threat quarterback, which I understand because you've actually watched the spring games and you watched him play last year. He has like 300 career yards rushing in high school. He was a thrower. Like he got brought to Notre Dame because he was a thrower.
He's a guy that throws the football well, but he can't.
I mean, that's what you recruited him to do. He got faster at Notre Dame, and I think Kenny was always like really athletic, but he just didn't run. He wasn't a runner. And I think he realized, like, if I'm going to win this thing, I'm going to have to utilize all my skills. And then, of course, playing behind Riley last year, and you said, okay, well, like, look, that's an element that you bring to the table. But when he started running around in last year's spring game, I'm like, okay, that's not something I saw from Kenny breaking down his film in high school. And I think that's what's allowed him to be in this conversation. Because if it was just about passing ability, Kenny's a very underrated thrower, but he's not CJ. He's a very smart kid, but he's not CJ. What makes this a real battle is because he's close enough as a thrower to where the athletic aspect of it, now that he is more willing and able to run and make plays with his legs, that allows us to be closer of a competition. But he can still sling it, and he can still throw it. I personally think CJ wins the job. That's just my own prediction. But he's going to have to win it. It's not going to be one where they're going to like lay out the red carpet and have a quarterback battle that's geared towards doing whatever we can to prop up CJ. He's going to have to win it, and Kenny's going to make that harder. I think he's going to, but I've told my listeners at Irish Breakdown, like, guys, I think CJ's going to win it, and I think CJ's special. But if Kenny beats him out, what does that say about how good Kenny Minchey is?
Yeah.
And because CJ's not going to just regress and struggle. And so, but whoever starts it, long-winded way of answering your question, I apologize. It's that part of the game is going to improve. Plus, instead of Bo Collins, who's a nice player for Notre Dame, you're throwing in Malachi Fields there, who's an inch taller, 15 pounds heavier, faster, more proven. You're talking about bringing in Will Pauling, who 2 years ago was a 70-plus catch, 800-yard guy. And people forget this, for Notre Dame's current receivers coach. He played for Mike Brown in 2023 at Wisconsin, and then Mike Brown coached him at Cincinnati. So a lot of times you get these transfers, and it's the first year for a coach. I've got to learn what he does well. I got to learn his strengths and weaknesses, how to coach him, how to reach to him, how to push him, how to do what. Well, he already knows that. He recruited the kid out of high school and coached him all but 1 year, which was last year at Wisconsin, on top of bringing back Great House and Will Pauling, and then, of course, the kid that I would encourage you guys to – a name to remember. I'm going to put this in the back of your mental Rolodex. Eli Raridan at tight end. So the weapons are there. You just got to have a quarterback get the ball where it's supposed to go. And to your point, that's what we're going to see that's going to be a little bit different. And if you can have a pass game that can just make people respect it, you don't need to be Jaden Daniels from 2 years ago. You don't need to be Joe Burrow. Just a pass game that says if you're going to commit to just all your resources to shutting down Love and Price, we're going to make you pay. Because if Notre Dame can do that, how do you defend this offense? Because they still could run the ball last year, even when everybody in the stadium knew what was going on. A&M knew what was happening that last drive. Couldn't stop it.
Georgia.
Right, exactly. Just couldn't stop it. And Georgia did as good a job as anybody for most of the game. But when the game was on the line, Notre Dame was able to do what they needed to do. Imagine if Notre Dame could hit some of those open receivers moving forward and make some of those tougher throws that Riley did a good job of in the postseason when they fell behind. That's what was frustrating for me is like, dude, that's the guy at Duke I remember. Yeah. That gunslinger, that's the dude I thought you were getting at Notre Dame, the guy that we saw at Duke. Where was that when it was 7-7? Yeah. And that's what was frustrating. I think that's why missing the spring hurt and the foot injuries and all that kind of stuff. But I still loved Riley Leonard and what he did for this program. I'm not trying to act like, they won in spite of Riley. No, they needed Riley last year because they didn't have that O-line. They didn't have the same kind of receiving core they're going to have this year. But it'll just be nice to see Mike Denbrock be able to call an offense that really fits who he is and what he is. Because if you break down their offense, the first 4 games, they had the first 5 games, then a bye. If you look at their pass game from Stanford on, which is coming out of the bye, very different. Different calls, different concepts, different things, because he finally said, okay, now I know what Riley can do. And he tailored it to Riley's skill set because that's what good coaches do. And Now you're going to see him get to build an offense around a way that's more suited to who I think he wants to be as a play caller.
Yeah, you talked about the guys who are going to catch the rock, obviously. I mean, I think Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, being in the second year in the offense. Obviously, you mentioned Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. I mean, they bring in over 229 combined catches, over 2,800 yards in their career. And you did talk about Eli Raridan. Like, I think people just kind of take for granted the tight end position at Notre Dame is like the next man up. He's going to be drafted in the first or second round. Like, that's just it. I mean, there's just not a lot of talk about him. And you touched on him a little bit, but like just maybe some guys that we're not thinking about. Like we talked about the 4 wide receivers, but like, there's a Cam Williams there. There's Elijah Burris who looked really good in the spring game.
Micah Gilbert.
Micah Gilbert, yeah. KK Smith. I mean, those guys are any of those guys see the field a lot and actually just make a pop for this team this year?
I hope so. Because I think the one thing that's still missing, and this is where I think Cam Williams comes into play and where maybe a KK Smith, but I think more so Cam Williams could come into play, is the one thing that's missing is just that pure, okay, I can just run by you. I mean, Malachi Fields is 6'4", 220 with the speed he has, with an almost 40-inch vertical jump. At least that's what Bruce Feldman reported in his Freaks list last year. Is he had him. And what's interesting, he reported Will Pauling as having a 4.39, but I don't know that he plays that way because Wisconsin never used him that way. So
does anybody in Wisconsin have a 4.39 at all?
Well, I mean, he's fast, and we saw that firsthand. But it's like it's hard to run a 4.39 when you only go.
Bryan, he's solid, man. I know you know that, but like he's solid. I was telling Tyler, like when Notre Dame picked him up, when I saw that, I was like, man, that's a one of those that maybe not steals all the headlines nationally, but that dude 2 years ago when Wisconsin running that dairy raid could actually run it a little bit. Like, he was nasty, bro, at receiver, especially later on in the year when they were slinging it around a little more for Whiskey.
Yeah, like the LSU game, for example. But, like, that's the only game they really let him stretch the field. That's what was kind of frustrating. It's like, where was that all year? And they were doing that, if you look at his, like, average depth of target and all that kind of stuff out of the slot. But like, the tools are there. That's why I tell people, like, he was banged up last year. It was his first year without Mike Brown. The quarterback situation in Wisconsin was a hot mess. Like, this is a kid who had 70 catches for 800 yards, to your point, in the Big Ten. It's not like he was playing in, like, the MAC, and you're hoping it translates because, like, that's can be an issue. You see all the time these kids that come from G5 levels and they put up numbers, and then they come to the P5 and they can't do that, like C.J. Daniels at LSU, for example, last year is an example. And some do. Like, I think if Colin Lacey at Louisville doesn't get hurt last year, I think he has a huge – I think that receiving core would be ridiculous. If he didn't get hurt early in the year. Like, I think that'd have been oh yeah, exactly. But a lot don't like do exactly at the P4 level what they did at the G5 level. This is not that. These are two P4 receivers that produced. It's not like I hope Bo Collins can produce at a higher level than he ever did at Clemson. It's, dude, just do what you did. Like, if all Will Pauling does is what he did 2 years ago, if all Malachi Fields does is repeat the last 2 years, that's a huge receiver upgrade for Notre Dame. Huge.
Yeah, I agree.
They don't need to be Will Fuller from 2015. They don't need to do that. Just be Miles Boykin. Why do I say that? Because that's what Malachi was the last 2 years. Was basically Miles Boykin, 50-plus catches, 800-plus yards. That's exactly what he was.
Well, Bryan, I'm not really sure that this unit needs a huge introduction, and I'm not really sure what can be said about him, but we're going to try, man. The running back unit for Notre Dame, one of the best, if not the best. I mean, it's arguable between Penn State and Notre Dame, the best 1-2 punches in the country with Jeremiah Lovin.
It's definitely arguable. I'll tell you
Bryan,
that.
as you saw.
Apparently it's not.
Yeah.
Apparently it's not. According to your guys'
Twitter that you jumped in the ring with us on.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Lovin, Jadarian Price, but also they got 2 other really solid pieces too, with Aeneas Williams, who really showed his ability to catch the rock out of the backfield those last couple of the semifinals in the national championship game. And I heard you, I believe it was on Crane and Company, talking about this guy. And honestly, this is why we have you on too, man. You know your stuff. I went and looked him up. I just started laughing. I was like, they got this dude I've barely even heard of that is just a freaking monster out of the state of Texas, highly ranked, like top 5 tailback in the country coming out of high school, and Kedron Young, that I think people are going to be introduced to more this year. So just
it's 242.
Yeah. Just talk about this ridiculous group. And I mean, I'll ask the question just to ask it, just so I can hear you answer it. Is this the deepest backfield in the country?
If you frame it that way, yes. Like, I think it's a legitimate debate to say who's the better 1-2 punch. Is it the raw production in the run game and pass game of Penn State's two backs? Because they both rushed for more yards. They also had more catches and receiving yards. Notre Dame's guys had more touchdowns. Or is it the efficiency numbers where the Notre Dame guys were significantly more effective on a per touch basis because Penn State didn't have a quarterback who had 180 carries for almost 1,000 yards? A legitimate debate to have. I think the Penn State running backs outperformed the Notre Dame running backs in their individual matchup. Now, that is also can be something that can be misleading because you're not playing the same defense. Notre Dame didn't have Abdul Carter and Zane Durant and Deni Dennis Sutton on their defense going against those guys. And it might have looked a little different if they did. Could you imagine Notre Dame last year if they had Deni Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter, and Zane Durant in the postseason? No. Yeah, for a different day. It's the depth that makes Notre Dame different. It's the fact that you can come out of halftime and say, okay, we're going to run the ball up the middle of Jeremiah, and then as soon as we get them thinking we're running it right at him, we're going to motion Aeneas out of the backfield, have him run a sluggo, and throw him the ball. You guys watched the play. That was designed 100% to go to Aeneas Williams. With your team down 10-3 in the Orange Bowl, the semifinals, you're coming out of halftime saying we're going to run a sluggo to our freshman, quote-unquote, number 3 running back. And then the next play, they run outside zone with him, and he rips it off and gets down inside the 5, and a couple plays later,
Brock, man.
And then, and he only played because Jabron Payne got hurt last spring. Because Jabron Payne was that guy for Notre Dame 2 years ago. He's back. And then, of course, Kedron Young, who's an absolute tank, and by the way, had more catches for more receiving yards than any other running back in the Blue Gold game. You know, if you go watch, he caught a wheel route from C.J. Carr, a 242-pound running back running a wheel route, catching it on a dime, and coming out of the Blue Gold game. So it's the depth that's the separator for Notre Dame. I think you could say Louisville's 1-2 punch is pretty outstanding, and Isaac Brown is a guy that needs to be in the conversation for top back. He actually was my number 2, slightly ahead of Nicholas Singleton. I'm not going to argue with anybody when say Nicholas Singleton should be 2 or 1. There's just some really good backs in that top 4 that I think are in the conversation, but it's the depth. It's Notre Dame could lose a Jeremiah Love and be like, dude, you're going to be fine. Because Jadarian Price is 1,000-yard back anywhere else besides Notre Dame. And if you have to go to battle with Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, Jabron Payne, and they've got a freshman who I love from Jersey named Nolan James Jr., you're going to be just fine. There's been years where Notre Dame's starting running back was not as good as their current 3rd, 4th, or 5th running back. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And years where Notre Dame was pretty good. Notre Dame went 11-2 a couple years ago 5 years ago now with Tony Jones Jr. as their leading running back. And I like Tony, but that's a different type of cat than what they've got throughout the depth chart now. And so I think the depth is the piece that separates this team. And you need that to play a 16-game season or 15-game season. You're going to have guys that are banged up. You're going to have guys that go out. Do you have the kind of, horsepower and firepower coming off the bench to say, hey, we can lose a Riley Mills and still beat Penn State, still beat Georgia? And so I laugh when Georgia fans are like, yeah, but we didn't have Carson Beck. And I was like, do I really want to list off all the starters that Notre Dame was missing that game? Like, do you really want to go down that path? But they still won those 2 games because they're not just putting in like former walk-ons, on the field to replace their studs. They're putting in dudes. I mean, A&M saw that first game. Who was the player that broke that game open for Notre Dame? It was Jadarian with the 47-yard touchdown run that got Notre Dame on the board. So, he goes against, I think Jeremiah Love, against Florida State went like 9 for 19, 9 carries, 19 yards. Well, why did Notre Dame still be able to run the ball? Because Jadarian had like 90-some yards on 8 carries. Jeremiah's ripping up USC at 99 yards at halftime, over 90 yards at halftime, gets hurt on the first series of the drive. Jadarian's going into the 3rd quarter with like 2 carries for -1 yards. He ends up with 112. So you can lose a kid like that, and with the playoffs on the line, and put in Jadarian Price, and he rips off a couple 30-yarders, and you led by more in the second half than you did in the first half. Yeah. There aren't a lot of teams that can do that. And that's what makes this running back room special. And shout out to Dylan McCullough, who's now at the Raiders, for building it. And now it's up to Jaywan Sider, who ironically left the Penn State. And people say, like, well, he knew. Guys, that's not why he made the decision. He didn't make the decision because he evaluated thinking Penn State's running backs slightly worse than Notre Dame's. That's a life decision, a financial decision. There's a lot of things go into that. That's a petty Twitter argument. That's not a real argument. Coaches leave jobs all the time where they're leaving behind better players because it's just what's best for their futures. But you also aren't going to leave the job you have if you don't think you're going to a
Absolutely.
one. And when you can lose a coach like Dylan McCullough, who I thought is the best running back coach in the business, but replace him with a guy that's got a pretty good proven track record, that's one of those things that goes back to your original point, Lance, is about the health of the program, that you can lose a guy like a Dylan McCullough and replace him with a guy like Jaywan Sider. You can lose a Al Golden and replace him with Chris Ash. And in some cases, you lose a guy like Jared Parker who goes to Detroit and you replace him with Mike Denbrock. And so you get upgrades. And, that's the sign of a good coach. I love when people will criticize a head coach. Like, well, like I've said this, Kirby Smart only won 2 back-to-back titles because he hired Todd Monken. If it's like people look at that like I'm insulting, I'm like, no, that's not an insult, guys. That's part of his job, is to hire great coaches, and he hired a great coach and let him run the offense.
Brian,
run the offense.
I don't mean to cut you off. I don't mean to cut you off, man. But the Step Brothers,
your show, you cut me off whenever you want.
The Step Brothers moment where do we just become best friends? That just happened just then, man. Yeah. I've said that many times on this show, that not to get off topic here, but yeah, like it's not a coincidence that Kirby Smart, again, best coach in the game right now, but the 2 back-to-back championships that he won was when he had the best coordinator that he's had while he was there on either side of the ball. When he had Todd Monken.
Yeah.
And
but Lance, people take that as an insult. I'm like, no, that's a very important part of a coach's job, is to make great hires. This isn't the 1980s when Lou Holtz was calling the offense, and there were games in the late 80s and early 90s. Well, actually it was 90s because it was after Barry Alvarez left, where Lou Holtz would get pissed off about the defensive coordinator. So he'd start calling plays on both sides of the ball. That's not happening now. Kirby's not calling the offense. He's got to hire someone that's very good at their job. That's not an insult.
Part of being an elite coach.
Like if Notre Dame if Notre Dame wins a title this year, you're going to hear me praise Mike Denbrock, or even if they, have another great season, praise Mike Denbrock, praise Chris Ash, praise Mike Mickens, who's the best DB coach in the business, praise Al Washington and Joe Rudolph. That doesn't mean that Marcus Freeman's not a good head coach. He's the one that hired him.
Exactly.
But it's also, you can acknowledge that played a big role in their success, is that they hired him. And I just think it's funny that people like take that as an insult. Like when you say like, well, he won because he had great assistants. And it's like, well, what are you trying to say? That he's a smart coach who hires good assistants? Like, I don't understand why you're taking this as an insult. Like, that's just a fact. You look at what Georgia's offense looked like before Todd Monken, and you look at what it's looked like since Todd Monken. It should be pretty easy to us.
Brian, Tyler's sitting there kind of smiling right now, and our listeners are too. They know this, that a love language of mine absolutely is talking about coordinators and how important of a role they truly do play in championships and program success. And so let's get the pads popping, man, and switch to the other side of the ball.